Hello, this is John Prieto. I'm with the Canal Society of New Jersey. This is a re-recording from my presentation in January entitled Troubled Waters, the Morris Canal in Paterson. At the time, the meeting had some technical issues, so this presentation will be uploaded to YouTube. Unfortunately, there won't be any availability for questions and answers, but you certainly can go through the Canal Society if you do have any questions on this presentation. Okay. Troubled Waters, the Morris Canal in Paterson. So in 1825, Paterson was surveyed by Ephraim Beach for the route of the Morris Canal in Paterson. Paterson had already been underway with the Society of Useful Manufacturers starting in 1791, as promoted by Alexander Hamilton. And the sum basically used water from the Passaic River to power mills for places of business in downtown Paterson. This is an old pictorial showing the downtown area, where the some raceways were, and the manufactories. Now, the Morris Canal route is off this picture, as it did travel when it was finally completed. It did pass south of downtown and never really touched the area. So among the stated purposes of the canal was to provide transportation, raw materials, and fuel to the Patterson manufactories. But in the original meeting, held by the state committee, Paterson was not represented. So there were three possible routes considered for the canal in Paterson. We can refer to them as lower, middle, and upper. So the lower route would have taken the canal into Paterson, have it connect at the Passaic River, and then make the river navigable below the Great Falls. And the city was okay with this one, but it did prefer the next route. So here is the lower route. As you could see, it just entered coming out of Little Falls and heading toward the Great Falls, and after that it would have picked up the river. The middle route, which the city preferred, would raise the Sum Dam and run the canal at the rocks near the Great Falls. So the Society of Useful Manufacturers preferred this route and wound up protesting the upper route, which will follow. Here's the middle route, cut up toward the falls and then head more or less southeast. The upper route ran the canal along Garrett Mountain. What that did was it maintained the level and added, but there had to be an aqueduct added in Little Falls. So ultimately the upper route was chosen, which kept the level between Lincoln Park and Bloomfield some 17 miles without locks and plains. But again, the canal wound up bypassing the downtown area. So preliminary work in Paterson began in mid-1826, but the final route really wasn't decided until late in 1826. So work on the canal in Paterson actually finished in November of 1829. But again, you could see it did not touch the downtown area. Here is a pictorial of the canal above the city from the point of view of the Morris Canal, which is over to the lower right. But there was a problem with this final arrangement. The New Jersey legislature had already conferred the rights to the Passaic River Basin to both the Society of Useful Manufacturers and the Morris Canal. And so the so-called dispute began. Late in 1826, the governor of some, Roswell Colt, immediately protested the canal's location. The next year, the Sum complained that the canal was tapping the Rockaway River further upstream. So the canal's remedy at the time was to send Lake Apacon water east to make up the difference. In July of 1828, the Sum hired J.L. Sullivan, who was an engineer, and his report criticized the canal, while also proposing that the western part of the canal be closed. He also went on to praise the creation of railroads and discussed water supply. Here is the cover of the report from 1828. It had a very long title. Sullivan's report stated that the Sum had rights to all of the Passaic River Basin and all its tributaries. So again, the report went on to praise railroads and that they clearly favored them over the use of canals. And it hinted about water supply and the idea of controlling water in the Great Falls area, so it could be sent to other areas such as New York City. Okay, the dispute continued. 1828, there were back and forth refutations by both parties, and a judgment afforded water rights to both Sum and the Morris Canal the same year, but that Sum did not suffer any harm from the canal. 1829. After Sum loses a dispute with the canal over access to the Rockaway River, they built their upper raceway. 1830, there was a New Jersey court case, and it was shown that the Sum was unable to prove Morris Canal caused it harm, and the injunction against the canal was denied. So after a few years, there was a settlement. Sum agreed to build a new dam and reservoir and let the canal take water as needed, while the canal agreed to build a connecting channel and release canal water to the Sum if they needed. Here is a pictorial from, I believe, 1840 from Robert Goller's book. You can see in the upper right are the Sum raceways. The channel that we talked about connected part of the raceway with the canal, and at that point where it touched the canal, just in front of it was a control gate. Sum's dam was over here on top of the falls. So there were some simmering issues going forward. We were calling it the sum of all fears. Okay, so some of the issues were competition for water access. Patterson's mills were concerned that they wouldn't have enough water power for the machinery. Water supplies in the Passaic River tributaries became an issue. And there was concern by the Sum that the canal was going to start manufacturing, and the canal was concerned that Sum was going to start getting into the transportation business. So they were really getting at loggerheads. Okay, 1829 was a dry year. There were other concerns about low river levels. 1829 also was when the canal started to fill in earnest. 1830 was another drought year, bad enough where some of the mills in the society were shuttered and workers were let go. Down the road, there were other dry years, 1845, 46, and also 1860. So, of course, the coal trade in Paterson was big business. There were 19 coal yards and one industrial facility in Paterson, and they were mostly all located at the canal's banks. Okay, so coal shipped by the canal served Paterson in these industries: locomotive manufacturing, silk mills, textile mills, and of course coal dealers. One of the early canal customers was the Wilson Coal Yard. Here's an old advertisement from 1900 by James Wilson, advertising coal for sale. And it has the address at the bottom and also makes mention of the canal, so nobody could miss it. Now, a major customer of coal along the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad was Gould and Schuyler. And you'll note here that there were rail sidings put in to help with the loading and unloading. Daniel Dowling, over by New Street, was another big-time coal yard. Here's a picture of Daniel Dowling along the canal, the coal yard, from Mr. Goller's book. It's hard to see, but you could tell in the shed under the name there were different types of coal. This was the egg type. Here is a receipt from Lehigh Valley Coal from 1901 for the White Hopper Yard in Paterson, with the account marked for the Newark office. Okay, silk trade. Silk was also big business in Paterson. The mills were originally powered by water from some. So statistics show that the silk industry in Paterson used as much as 35 or 40% of the coal shipped to Paterson. And the dyers of the silk use large amounts of coal for processed steam. Coal use eventually dropped over the years as the mills used alternative power sources, hydroelectric being one. In general, silk products were not shipped by the canal. Silk products were high in value and sensitive to weather and temperature. As a result, silk mills generally did not require direct rail sidings. They instead used wagons typically for transport. Eventually, they had what they called silk trains, which were used to provide bulk transport down to Jersey City and then express truck over to New York City, where they had some facilities for cold storage. Besides silk, some other goods shipped on the canal in Paterson, in and out of: locomotive parts, such as from Rogers Works, iron ore. At one time, there were turbine water wheels made in Paterson for use by the canal. Bricks from the brick yards in the Wayne area, and sandstone from the Paterson area used for churches in Newark. Also brownstone from Little Falls was some of those brownstones were used to build St. John's Church in Paterson. Here is Rogers Locomotive Works, an old sketch. With the upper left, if you'll notice, is the Morris Canal. It's very small, but you could see the mule team and the canal boat in the distance. Here's a picture, I believe, from the 1880s. It shows the canal over by Garrett Mountain. You could see over to the left, the big hill next to the towpath. Goods would have had to have been carted downhill some distance to their receiving point, or uphill back to the boats. So that was one of the issues that the canal had to deal with in Paterson, being located at the Garrett Mountain. So the Morris Canal in Paterson, oh, the troubles it's seen, and it had plenty of troubles. As we mentioned earlier, no sooner did the canal route become set that the Society of Useful Manufacturers protested. Mid-1826, and the canal wasn't even finished yet, a fatality occurred during construction. The next year, there was a petition by the canal company for a state loan, but another petition was filed by the inhabitants of Paterson objecting to the state extending credit to the canal. So there were tensions already. Of course, the ongoing concerns about the canal taking additional water and affecting the manufacturers in Paterson and its citizens. So the city itself had felt slighted by the canal's route bypassing the downtown. So calls for a railroad were granted. January 1831, the charter was given, and it became known as the Patterson-Hudson Railroad, which took the route from Paterson down to Jersey City. May 1829, the canal bank failed. 1832, now that was the first full season of the canal. A breach occurred near Paterson, and that wound up holding up traffic for several days. The next year, the canal company had applied to the legislature to use canal water for manufacturing. Of course, Paterson objected. And again, this would come up later. By the late 1830s, rumblings of the canal company setting its sight on manufacturing and the some looking for water transportation resurfaced. 1839, Paterson suffered severe storms and freshets. Several breaches occurred in the canal in and around the Paterson area. A couple of years later, heavy rains hit the Paterson area again, causing 4 breaches. 1840s and 1850s, it was reported that canal company workers were frequently found in Paterson to repair ongoing canal breaks, the so-called towpath walker. A wall was eventually constructed at Rock Cut, which was near that control gate, to protect the businesses downhill. A wall was also constructed at O'Neill's coal yard, and that was paid for by the owner. Okay, so there was a period of calm between the canal and some after that 1836 agreement. But as you'll recall, in mid-1840s, 1845 was a dry year. So in July of 1845, Roswell Colt, Sum's governor, went ahead and ordered the opening of the control gate. Canal Company immediately closed it. In August of 1845, some employees, on the orders of Roswell Colt, actually destroyed the control gate, and there were reports of someone brandishing a pistol. So here are pictures of Roswell Colt on the left, and Daniel Tyler, who was the president of the canal company at the time. There were attempts at communication between the two to try and settle the matter, but they fell by the wayside. In August 1845, Canal Company secures an injunction against some to prevent the removal of a permanent wall that was previously installed at the control gate. December of 1845, some protested. A ruling decreed that the injunction stands. Okay, so over the next few years, legal actions between both parties continued. Late 1840s, the Sum had an action in local court against the canal for rights of land under the permanent wall at the control gate, also for damages of diversion of waters. 1853, the Sum again approached the New Jersey Supreme Court, filed an action for diversion of water. Now, apparently these cases did not proceed any further. In the meantime, Mars Canal competition with the DNR, which Delaware and Raritan, and the DNH, which was the Delaware and Hudson Canal, led to an adjustment of Mars Canal tolls, which had the effect of favoring through traffic, which took precedence over way trade. So there were fewer stops along the way. Shipments straight to Newark meant that Paterson paid more for coal. 1840s. Issues arise over the legitimacy of the canal company payment of promissory notes, which were going to be used for the canal's improvements and enlargement. There were reports of many Pattersonians being fed up with the ongoing tensions, with some calling for the canal to end at the city or just to be abandoned. 1846. The state of New Jersey did bring suit against the canal company, filed in Paterson, but a summons was ultimately not served because not a single company director was from Passaic County. So the issue was dropped. Many letters to newspapers called for the mill shops in Paterson to go ahead and convert to coal-fired steam engines to run the plants, leading one supporter to write further that if steam power became cheaper than water power, the mills would just pack up and move to Jersey City. Bad weather continued. 1852, severe rains in the area caused another break in the canal at different points. May 1857, the aforementioned Thomas O'Neill, who had built the wall, there was a major breach at the canal bank near his yard. And it was big enough that it caused the entire 17-mile level between Lincoln Park and Bloomfield to be drained. If you can imagine that. A quick calculation revealed that that would have amounted to about 100 million gallons. Wonder where it all went. 1857, a strange story. A canal boat named Sally Ann somehow found its way into the Passaic River, was swept over the dam that the Sum had put up. Fortunately, it did not go over the Great Falls. 1857, more bad news. There was a collision of canal boats near the rocks along a sharp bend. And also there was a shipwreck which occurred where the bridge and abutment rocks gave way and fell into the canal, after which a boat containing iron ore sank. 1859, canal boatmen got involved. They met to set pricing for the transportation of coal. They were feeling shortchanged. A strike occurred over the issue, and there was a riot in Paterson. And around this time, theft and vandalism became an issue along the canal in Paterson. That led authorities to threaten the use of so-called canal police. March 1862, more heavy rain caused the canal to break away at the base of Garrett Mountain, flooding the city and some of the mills, also a foundry and other buildings, forcing families out of their homes. This particular break was about 30 feet long, and because it is part of the 17-mile level, a massive amount of water was released upon the city. By the 1860s, coal and iron ore shipped by the canal helped Paterson become one of the world's largest producers of locomotives. Again, Rogers being one. Of course, the railroads would become the very mode of transportation that would render the canal irrelevant. Late 1860s, the railroads were expanding. So the canal tried to reach an agreement with the Morris and Essex for a piece of the coal trade. In turn, the canal then sold its right-of-way in Paterson to the M&E Railroad, which built the Boonton Branch Railroad right through the city. Sort of ironic. October 1866, Patterson Waterworks. They had a reservoir up by New Street, halfway up Garrett Mountain. The reservoir suddenly gave way. It emptied itself into the canal, which in turn caused a break, which suspended canal navigation for 4 days. Almost 5 years later, an embankment between the DL and W Railroad and the canal gave way to near the Garrett Mountain. Part of the roadway then fell into the canal, causing more delays. 1871. This was the year that the Lehigh Valley Railroad leased the Morris Canal. It was a decision by the owners, since the canal business was waning. And there were other reasons that Lehigh wanted it, including access to the docks in Jersey City. So the canal continued to operate, but they eventually, the Lehigh Valley considered the canal an inconvenience. So of course they had other aims, including future water rights and rail access in Jersey City. 1874, a lot of suspicion in Paterson. So workers were drawing water off the canal to prevent frost damage to the banks. At the time, that led many Pattersonians to believe the canal was secretly trying to deepen the canal. Finally, by 1876, we do see the end of the saga between the Society of Useful Manufacturers and the Morris Canal. Some filed suit against the canal, or the Lehigh Valley Railroad at that time, for diversion of waters. Again, the resulting injunction was denied. So by the 1870s, more and more coal was shipped by rail. About 10% or less was shipped by the canal to Paterson. By the late 1800s, there were railroad companies had established railroad coal pockets, which were large access yards and coal storage. That helped move even more coal by rail. And by 1900, canal coal shipments had dropped to a point where the Lehigh Valley Railroad took fewer and fewer new orders to handle coal for the canal. Late 1800s. Here's a picture of the canal. Light cargo traffic. And in October of 1903, the Great Flood. Rainwater from the slope of the Garrett Mountain forced the canal company to cut the canal in 4 places. Of course, business was suspended and cargoes were literally dropped at the most available points. Here is another postcard picture view of flooding in downtown area. You can see it's up to the bridges. Fast water moving, another picture. This picture is from courtesy of Mr. Goller. This was very close to Paterson. This was over in West Paterson, a picture of the flood. The arrow showing the canal route. Quieter times along the canal around 1900. This was near the DL&W tracks. This is from 1905. At that point, there was minimal activity on the canal. And DL&W Railroad was really overtaking all the freight in and out of the city. By the early 1900s, it was thought that the canal was really only useful as a convenience and to deliver coal to dealers who wanted Lehigh coal in particular. Coal dealers in general obtained most of their coal by rail at that point. And in 1903, abandonment talks were underway for the canal. By 1912, local public opinion seems to have turned to keeping the canal, mainly for coal carrying, and there were many hearings to discuss the matter. News reports at the time referred to the Lehigh Valley lease as a, quote, species of public treason, and the railroad-led coal trust, quote unquote, monopoly, was keeping coal prices high. Another oddball story for Patterson. In May 1917, boys playing in the canal at O'Neill's coal yard found an unexploded shell. Police surmise it was from the Kingsland munitions plant, which I believe was down by Lyndhurst. With the abandonment of the canal imminent, state legislators from Passaic County were more than pleased to pass the canal abandonment bill in 1922. 1925, there was another storm that hit the Paterson area, causing the Passaic River to rise to very dangerous levels. The mayor at the time called for reopening of the abandoned canal to divert floodwaters. These are some nice pictures courtesy of Steamtown, National Historic Site, showing the canal. This is from 1927. Really has pretty much become a garbage ditch. Same area, different view. Another picture nearby. We're calling this picture Troubled Waters No More. Postscript to the story, in 1926, canal lands in Paterson were sold to the M&E Railroad. DL&W Railroad, they bought a section of the canal ultimately for a new railroad station. And the city of Paterson took over a section of the canal, planning to use it for a storm sewer. So, in modern times, what's left of the canal in Paterson? Well, we do have some small pieces evident. This is one of the most prominent. This was a pocket park, which was part of the old canal route off New Street, about halfway up the mountain. And it becomes part of the small but growing, hopefully, Morris Canal Greenway in Paterson and Passaic County. So that's the end of the presentation. Again, this will be uploaded to YouTube, for viewing at a future date. Thank you for the opportunity, and we will talk soon.